The story starts where party leader Albert stands there with his arms crossed and yells at our protagonist Dill, telling him right in front of the whole group that he's officially kicked out of the party. He doesn't stop there, getting right in Dill's face and screaming that his support magic is basically trash and completely useless now, which leaves Dill standing there looking totally stunned. But he realizes that being thrown out like this is actually the best thing that could have happened, since it's the exact moment his journey to becoming the strongest guy alive really begins. Flashing back to a few days ago, the group was in the middle of a crazy fight against a massive lizard monster that had the whole team on edge. Albert yells over the noise for Dill to get some buffs going, and Dill tells him he's on it, immediately calling out his enhancement spell. A giant magic circle lights up the area as he pours his power into the team, and the knight grunts, mentioning how any normal person would have been turned to ash by now. The witch sees her opening and shouts that she's moving in, launching a massive fireball that slams into the monster. It lets out a huge scream as the magic hits home, and the priestess lets out a sigh of relief. She runs over to the knight, telling him she's going to get him patched up right away. The priestess focuses her power and casts a healing spell to patch up the team, and the knight lets out a breath, telling her that really helps, giving the witch the opening she needs to scream out a fire spell that sends a massive spear of black flames right into the monster. As it screams in pain, the witch looks back and tells Albert that now is the perfect time to finish it off. Albert doesn't miss a beat, calling out his strongest slash and taking the monster's head clean off in one move. With the fight over, Albert throws his arm around Dill and cheers that they finally won, while the rest of the group starts celebrating the win together. As they start heading back, the witch mentions her fire magic felt incredible today, but she knows it's really because of Dill's help. The knight tries to brag about his own moves, but the priestess shuts him down, saying his strength came from Dill's buffs. Dill just laughs it off and tells them it was all about their teamwork. This is Dill Evans, a support mage who's always happy to help his friends. He's been with this group, Brilliant Road, since they were all rookies, and he can't imagine being anywhere else since. He's convinced that if they're going to become the best adventurers in the world, it's going to be as a team. Albert's all fired up, telling the group they should head back to the meeting spot to report their success, and Dill shouts back, ready to go. The whole crew starts walking back together, feeling pretty good about how the day went. Except Albert's vibe starts to shift. Looking back, he realizes he used to think things would just stay like this forever, but suddenly he stops and points right at Dill. He tells him he's going to say it one more time just so it's clear. Dill is officially fired. Dill just stands there with a blank look on his face, completely shocked by what he's hearing, and finally asks Albert what he's even talking about. He tries to laugh it off, asking if this is just some kind of bad joke, but Albert doesn't crack a smile. He says he's being dead serious and asks Dill if he even knows what his current adventurer rank is. Dill stammers that he's a B rank, knowing the system goes from S all the way down to F. Usually S rank is for legends and A is for total geniuses. For pretty much any regular guy, hitting B rank is the absolute ceiling and as high as they'll ever go. Albert says he finally made it to that level, but he's not satisfied. He tells Dill he has no plans of just being another average adventurer. Albert clenches his fist, dead set on making it to A rank before eventually hitting the very top at S rank. But to get there, he says he has to cut the dead weight and swap Dill out for someone who can actually keep up. Dill just stands there looking completely crushed, unable to even find the words to respond to his friend. And then Albert introduces his replacement, a high-level C-rank spearman who's already standing there with the group. Dill tries to plead with them, reminding Albert how he's always used his magic to support the party, but it's like the group doesn't even care. Albert just gives him this shady look and says he's finally realized the truth. Dill is totally lost, just looking at him and waiting for whatever cold thing he's about to say next. As Albert stands over the corpse of a monster, staring at the blood on his sword and thinking about how much his power has grown, he starts laughing, saying the crew has become insanely strong lately, and finally tells Dill they've reached a point where his support magic is basically useless to them. Dill is losing it, shouting out to the rest of the group to see if they're really okay with this. He looks at their faces and realizes something's wrong, asking if they all knew he was getting kicked. The witch just gives him a nasty smirk, saying obviously they knew because they're the real party member. Dill tries to defend himself, reminding them how much his support magic helped them win all those fights, but the witch just laughs it off, telling him that was just a line Albert made them say to keep him around. The priestess joins in with a dark look, admitting they only sucked up to him so he wouldn't leave the party, and Albert just grins like a villain, saying he was a decent tool back when they were still rookies. The witch keeps twisting the knife, saying they're so powerful now that his magic doesn't even make a difference. As they stand over him, telling him he's nothing but dead weight who doesn't bring anything else to the table. The priestess mocks him one last time, asking if he was actually dumb enough to think they were being serious. The witch looks at him with total disgust and calls him gross, while Dill's legs finally give out and he collapses hard onto the floor. As Albert and the girls laugh at his misery, Dill realizes the friendship he thought they had was all just a fake act. Albert doesn't even look back, reaching out to the spearman and telling him he's looking forward to working together. The spearman grabs his hand with a huge grin, promising to give it his all and handle whatever they need. Albert mentions how great it is to finally have a teammate they can actually rely on, and the witch adds that with this new crew, reaching S rank is actually possible, leaving Dill sitting there in a daze as he watches his old life walk right out the door. He tries to find his voice and tells them to wait, reaching out a hand to stop them, but the witch just waves him off, telling him he's officially used up and better not show his face ever again. Dill just sits there on the floor, completely alone and destroyed by the people he trusted. The door shuts with a final click, leaving Dill in total silence as he sits on a bench in the city square, looking completely lost. He stares at the ground and asks himself what he's even supposed to do now, but tries to keep his head up as a bird flies by. He tells himself that since he's a C rank, he can probably find another party if he puts in the work. Then he starts overthinking, remembering Albert's voice yelling that he's fired. He's terrified that if he joins a new crew, he'll just end up getting kicked out all over again. He thinks back to Albert's big talk about reaching the top and becoming an S-rank party, and suddenly something clicks. He looks at his own hand and realizes he actually wants that for himself. He wants to be an S-rank adventurer too. Dill stands up with a look of total determination, saying he doesn't have any time to stay depressed in a place like this. He heads straight into the woods alone, gripping his staff while blue status screens start flickering into view around him. He stops in a clearing and pulls up his main status window to see exactly where he stands because, once an adventurer trains their body and mind enough, they get the power to see their own stats like a menu. Dill checks his status screen one last time, seeing his level 33 stats and support skills. He says he needs to train a bit before even thinking about a new party, so he heads deeper into the woods, though he knows a solo support guy like him can only handle low-rank areas. He admits to himself that an E or D rank forest is probably his limit, but he finds a target anyway, aiming his staff and yelling for a fireball to blast through the trees. The flames surge forward as the wolf monster just stands there with a tiny burn on its head. It's barely hurt and looks pretty annoyed. Dill sees the weak damage and sighs, realizing his fire magic is way too weak because he's non-elemental. He even bought a staff specifically for attacking, but it doesn't change the fact that everyone in this world is born with a specific element. It's just how things work. And when someone like the witch uses magic that matches their element, the power is massive. It's easy for them to learn and use, while someone like the priestess or any other mage trying to use the wrong element finds it nearly impossible to get results. The effects end up being tiny. Dill knows that for a non-elemental guy like him, support and making potions are easy, but the lack of real offensive power is a huge problem. He stares up at his magic circle, and suddenly something clicks. He gets this determined look on his face, thinking that if the standard way won't work, he's just going to have to try something else. Dill leans into his stance and puts his hand out, yelling for another fireball as he tries to keep the pressure on. He shouts for the magic again, but the flames just pop against the wolf's face without doing much real damage. He thinks to himself that if he just keeps hitting it over and over, it has to go down eventually. He lets out another fireball, and finally, the wolf's leg gives out, and it hits the dirt. Dill stands there looking totally drained, just trying to catch his breath, while he looks at the wolf lying there with smoke coming off its head. It turns out the thing is still alive. It just fainted from the constant hits. Dill wipes some sweat off his face, looking pretty tired after such a long fight for just one monster. He stares at the wolf and realizes his magic isn't enough to actually finish it off. He decides he's got to do it by hand, so he reaches back and pulls a sharp dagger from his belt, holding it ready over the wolf's neck. He stabs down to end it. Even though being non-elemental is the most common thing in the world, it makes life as an adventurer pretty rough. Dill looks down at his hands, feeling pretty disappointed that it took 3 whole spells just to knock out a basic forest wolf. Dill is just standing there when a sudden loud sound catches his attention and makes him look up. He wonders what's going on, spinning around to find the source of the noise nearby, and he sees a girl with red hair sprinting through the forest. She's totally out of breath and looking exhausted. Turns out she's being hunted by a group of guys in hoods who are right on her heels. The girl tries to fight back by launching a fireball at them, but it doesn't do a thing, so one of the attackers just shouts for a magic shield. A big glowing barrier pops up and blocks her spell like it was nothing. She can't believe it. Her best shot didn't even leave a scratch on them, leaving her completely surrounded as the hooded men move in from every direction to cut off her escape. Dill watches from behind a tree, realizing this girl is getting jumped and needs help fast, but the lead guy reaches out and tells her she needs to come back, calling her Your Majesty while she backs away. The princess looks totally panicked, insisting that even if they keep calling her Your Majesty, she's really just a regular commoner. Dill is watching from the trees, repeating that title in his head and thinking she looks way too normal to be royalty. He's trying to figure out what's actually happening here while the lead attacker doubles down, telling her she's definitely their king, and the girl keeps backing away, shouting at them that she already told them they've got the wrong person. The guy in the hood gets this scary look in his eye, telling her that if she isn't going to listen to reason, then he doesn't have a choice but to get a little rough, and his hand starts sparking with magic energy. The princess is frozen with fear as the guy shouts magic arrow and lets a spell fly, leaving Dill watching in total shock. The magic blast hits the ground right where she's sitting, and the whole place lights up from the impact. She can't even move as a massive explosion of dust and smoke rips through the forest floor, and then, the other guys start coughing in the smoke, with one of them yelling that the attack was way too powerful for what they needed. The hooded guy doesn't seem to care about hurting her, since he figures they can just use a heal spell later, as the princess lies there in the dirt, letting out a tiny groan while she slowly starts to wake up. Dill is already there, holding her close to protect her from the blast, and when she opens her eyes to see him, he looks down and asks if she's doing okay. She's totally dazed and lets out a confused sound, but then she notices his hand is accidentally touching her. Dill's face turns bright red the second he realizes what's happening, and he completely loses his cool. He starts shouting apologies while jumping back, and the girl just blushes, trying to tell him it's fine, so Dill tries to get his head back in the game, asking her if she's actually hurt anywhere while she stammers out a reply. The guys in the hoods are caught off guard, with one of them pointing and yelling to find out who he is. Dill stands his ground in front of the girl, telling them that 3 guys ganging up on one girl is a pretty pathetic move. One of the hooded guys stares Dill down, trying to figure out if he's just some random adventurer, but then he grips his staff and says that since Dill saw them, there's no way he's letting him leave alive. Dill ignores the threat and looks back at the princess, asking if she's got enough mana left for magic because they need to end this and get her to safety. She says she can do it, so Dill immediately gets to work casting a massive enhancement spell. The princess stands there as his support magic kicks in, boosting her power to a whole new level. She lets out a massive fireball that's way bigger than usual, catching the hooded guys completely off guard. The spell connects and sets off a huge explosion that tears through the forest. As the smoke starts to clear, the princess wipes her face and thinks she finally took them out. But then a voice calls out from the haze, and it turns out one of the guys blocked the whole thing with a magic shield. Dill starts to sweat when he realizes that even with his best support magic, they couldn't break through the enemy's defense. One of the hooded guys lunges in with a blade. Dill barely has time to react before he takes a hit and groans in pain, stumbling back as the lead attacker smirks and says she's actually not bad, right before he fires off a magic arrow spell that hits the princess dead on. The force of the magic sends her flying. She screams as she hits the ground hard, leaving her totally out of the fight, and Dill can only watch in shock, shouting out to her as he realizes how bad their situation just got. Another one of the guys clicks his tongue and jumps down to close the distance. Dill is stuck on the ground watching him approach while the attackers stand over him, talking about how he's clearly a pro who's used to getting into scraps like this. But then, the guy with the staff steps up and reminds Dill that there's absolutely no way he can win a 3-on-1 fight. Dill curses to himself and starts to panic. He actually thinks about just making a run for it to save his own skin, but he looks over at the princess lying there unconscious, and knows deep down he can't just leave her behind to face these guys alone. Still, he's just a support mage. He sits there sweating, wondering what he's even supposed to do against 3 killers without any help. Dill tells himself to hold on a second. He's stuck wondering if he's really about to face these guys all on his own. He thinks back to his time with his old party and realizes he only ever used his magic to help them. He just figured that was how support magic worked, but since that was the only thing he knew, he never actually stopped to question it, until a new idea starts to click, and he looks at his own hand, wondering what would happen if he actually used a spell like Enhance on himself for once. One of the hooded guys starts closing in. He tells Dill not to take this personally since he's just doing his job, so Dill realizes he's got no other choice left. It's an all-or-nothing move, but he decides he's just going to go for it. The attacker lunges forward with his blade, yelling at Dill to just die already. He's moving in for the kill when Dill screams out Enhance and triggers his magic on himself. a massive pillar of light shoots up as the spell takes hold. There's a huge burst of speed that leaves the hooded guy standing there in a cloud of dust, totally confused about where Dill went. The guy looks up and completely loses it. Dill is already mid-air right above him, moving way faster than any support mage should be able to. The hooded guy is totally losing it, looking at Dill's new form and asking what on earth is going on right before. He lets out a loud scream as Dill drops from the sky, landing a massive hit that sounds like an explosion. Dill touches down on the ground with enough force to kick up a huge cloud of dust and debris everywhere. The attacker is left face down in the dirt, completely knocked out with his eyes rolled back in his head. Dill stands there looking at his own hands, totally shocked by the sheer amount of power he's feeling right now. And one of the other hooded guys watches from the side, thinking to himself that Enhance should never look this crazy unless something is different. The rest of the group starts shouting, asking what's wrong with his body since the spell definitely shouldn't be doing that. But Dill just clenches his fist and tells them that even though he doesn't fully get it himself, he's sure of one thing. He looks them straight in the eye and points a finger, saying that with this power he knows he can actually beat them. One guy tries to hold his partner back, but the other one just loses his cool and charges in, yelling at Dill not to look down on them. One of the hooded guys starts laughing like a maniac while Dill stands right in the middle of a massive flash of light. Dill stays completely calm as the guy yells from the shadows, bragging that there's no way anyone could react to someone moving that fast. Dill just looks straight ahead with this super focused look in his eyes and says that the guy is right about one thing, and right as the attacker swings a huge blow from behind shouting that he's finally got him, Dill doesn't even flinch. Instead of getting hit, Dill drops low and smashes a rock into the ground with so much power it literally explodes into pieces. The guy just stands there shaking, totally losing his mind and wondering how Dill even moved like that. Dill stands over the guy he just wrecked and casually says that while the speed was okay, it wasn't exactly something he couldn't see coming. He gives the last standing guy a terrifying look, which is enough to make the dude scream and start running for his life. Dill watches him disappear into the woods and lets out a long sigh, finally letting the tension go. But suddenly everything starts spinning, and he has to grab his head and steady himself as the side effects of that power hit him hard. Dill stares at his hands, feeling the drain after that fight. He realizes he used way too much mana, and that last spell felt way stronger than it should have, but he cuts that thought short. He looks back at the bodies on the ground and remembers there's someone else he needs to check on. He tells himself there's no time to be overthinking his magic right now, and rushes over to where the princess is lying still on the grass. He holds his hands over her and casts a quick heal spell. The princess starts to stir, groaning a bit as she slowly opens her eyes. Dill lets out a huge sigh of relief and tells her he's just glad to see she's okay. She looks up at him, still a little dazed, and realizes he's the same guy who stepped in to save her with his magic earlier. Suddenly she panics and sits up, asking what happened to the men who were after her. She looks over and sees the hooded guys sprawled out on the dirt, completely unable to move. Dill tells her that one of them managed to get away into the woods, but he was able to handle the rest of them. The princess looks at the mess around them, totally stunned, and asks if he's really the one who took everyone down. Dill just scratches the back of his head, looking a little awkward while he admits that he did. She looks at him with a lot of gratitude and thanks him for stepping in to save her back there, but then she softens up and gives him a smile, introducing herself as Luna Fluorite. Dill tells her his name is Dill Evans and then asks what the deal is. He wants to know what actually happened to her. Luna looks a bit hesitant and explains that she's actually just a girl from an orphanage in a small village. She describes how she was just out in the mountains one afternoon picking wild plants like usual when those hooded guys suddenly jumped out from the shadows and snatched her up before she could even react. Dill looks completely caught off guard and asks if she's saying she was straight up kidnapped, and Luna explains that they dragged her off to this massive, expensive-looking mansion she had never seen before. Luna remembers being trapped in that mansion, where her hands weren't tied but she was watched by guards every second, and things only got more confusing from there as she was eventually loaded onto a carriage that started moving fast. Sitting in the back, she looks around and realizes she's being driven deep into a forest, but the carriage suddenly slows down because the path is a total mess. The hooded guys start complaining about how deep the mud is. Luna sees they're distracted by the road and realizes this might be her only shot to get away, while one of the guards starts turning back to check on her, asking what's going on back there. She doesn't say a word, just locks eyes with the guy and gets ready to move. Then she lunges forward with everything she's got, shoving the guard right out of the moving carriage and onto the ground. Before they can even react, she jumps out and sprints into the woods as the guards start yelling for her to stop. But it's too late. She disappears into the trees while the men shout that the princess has escaped. Luna looks down, feeling pretty defeated as she explains that even though she tried to run, The men caught up to her in no time, and Dill puts the pieces together, realizing that's exactly when he happened to stumble onto the scene. He looks at her and asks if she has any clue why they would even want to kidnap her in the first place, but Luna admits she's totally in the dark about it, though she mentions they treated her with a weird amount of respect. Dill starts thinking back to the forest and remembers something important. Those guys were calling her Your Majesty the whole time, so he asks if there's any chance she's actually secret royalty, which leaves Luna looking completely shocked. She freaks out and says there's no way that's true, telling him she kept insisting to the guards that they had the wrong girl. But they wouldn't listen to a single word she said, just ignoring her while Dill wonders what's really going on. He thinks about those hooded guys and wonders if they had some kind of solid proof that she was the one they needed, while he looks back at Luna and asks if she has any idea where they were actually planning to take her. Luna thinks back and remembers the men mentioned they were heading for a place called Forma Cave, which comes as a total surprise to Dill. He repeats the name of the place, clearly knowing exactly where that is. Luna notices his reaction and asks if he's heard of it before, looking up at him while he pictures the entrance to the cave, a basic dungeon where every new F-rank adventurer starts their journey. She's genuinely impressed that he knows so much and tells him he's like an expert, but Dill just plays it down, saying it's only because he spent so much time there when he first started out as an adventurer, which makes Luna lose it. She grabs both of his hands and asks if he's actually a real adventurer, staring at him with total wonder while she holds on tight to his hands. Dill tries to keep it casual, but Luna says it makes perfect sense now why he's so incredibly strong, and she confesses that she's always looked up to adventurers, leaving Dill blushing and feeling a little awkward from all the attention. Luna realizes she's way too close to Dill's face and freezes up, while Dill just stands there, heart racing as he looks right back at her. She quickly jumps back with her hands up, apologizing for getting carried away, but Dill tells her it's fine and not to worry about it. Luna touches her blushing cheek, feeling totally confused about why she's suddenly acting so weird around him. She holds her face in her hands, wondering what's going on with her body. It feels like there's this strange heat building up inside. Her heart won't stop pounding, and she starts breathing heavy, feeling her whole body getting warmer by the second. She looks up in shock, finally realizing that all these crazy feelings might just be because she looks up to him so much. Dill breaks the silence by telling her he actually thinks her magic skills are impressive, which catches Luna completely off guard. She blushes and admits she's been secretly practicing up in the mountains so the head of the facility wouldn't find out, even if she's still just starting out. Dill gives her a big smile and tells her that it makes sense now, and he really thinks she's got a ton of natural talent for it. Luna clasps her hands together and looks at him with pure joy, thanking him for the boost of confidence. Dill starts wondering why Forma Cave is even a thing since it's not exactly a massive or impressive spot, and then he remembers hearing that the local monster population has been spiking lately, forcing the whole place to be closed off, leading him to wonder if there's some kind of hidden connection behind it all, until Luna snaps him out of it. She realizes she's just been following him blindly and asks where they're actually going, so Dill tells her they're heading straight for the royal capital, a destination that clearly catches her by surprise. He thinks it's pretty wild how she's so full of energy right after being kidnapped, then asks if she's ever been there before. Luna confirms it's her first trip, explaining that her village was way too far away for her to ever visit, and she gets all excited just thinking about how many people must live in a place that huge. Dill agrees it's the biggest city in the country and tells her he'll introduce her to some friends once they arrive, leaving Luna wondering just what kind of people he knows in a place like that. Dill just nods along as the conversation continues, giving a simple reply while the woman mentions a name, Sapphire. She explains that this is the person she's planning to go to for protection, which leaves Luna repeating the name to herself, wondering who they are. Dill doesn't waste any time and tells her they should probably get moving, and before long, they're standing right in front of the royal capital of Muria. Luna is completely floored by the massive sight, so Dill asks her what she thinks about seeing the capital for the first time. As they head into the city, Luna is practically vibrating with energy, telling Dill she's never seen so many people in one place before. Everything is new to her. She stops to look at all the flowers, saying they're beautiful, and that she's seen types she didn't even know existed. She finds some fancy jewelry and perfume bottles that look amazing, but her jaw drops the second she notices the insane price tags on them. While they're walking, a delicious smell suddenly hits her. She stops in her tracks and starts sniffing the air, tracking the scent right to a food stall. She leans in so close to the sizzling meat that the cook actually screams, wondering what she's doing. Dill catches up and awkwardly asks if she's maybe standing a bit too close to the grill, which finally snaps Luna back to reality. Luna starts panicking and apologizing like crazy after getting way too close to the grill, and while she's busy hiding her face from the embarrassment, Dill just laughs and buys a skewer from the cook. She starts eating the meat, but she's clearly feeling guilty about Dill having to pay for her. So when she thanks him, Dill just waves it off and says it was barely any money anyway. Luna won't let it go though, promising she'll definitely pay him back eventually. But then she spots something else. She points out a shop down the street, asking if that's actually a place that sells weapons. And Dill just watches her with a smile, thinking about how her energy reminds him of his own first day in the city. Eventually, they stop right in front of a massive, fancy building that leaves Luna completely breathless, and she just stands there staring up at it, barely able to believe how huge the place actually is. Dill lets her know they've arrived at the Royal Knight headquarters and says they should go in, so she follows him right through the doors. The inside of the Royal Knight headquarters is massive and super clean. Dill walks right up to the front desk with Luna and asks if they can see Sephi Sapphire. The receptionist doesn't look impressed, just asking if they actually have an appointment. And Dill starts getting nervous, thinking it might be harder to get in than he expected. Luna stands right behind him, wondering if her being there is making things more difficult for him. The woman behind the desk starts to apologize, looking like she's about to kick them out when a voice from across the lobby calls out Dill's name, making everyone stop and look. Dill's face lights up the second he sees who it is, and he calls out to Sephi. Sephi Sapphire walks over in her armor, telling Dill it's a surprise to see him hanging around the office. So Dill just smiles and asks if she's finally getting back from work. Sephi keeps walking as she talks, mentioning she literally just finished a mission and got back. Sephi looks at Dill and asks if he has a little bit of time to spare. Luna pops her head out from behind Dill to introduce herself, while Dill explains he really needs to talk. Sephi looks a bit surprised for a second, but then tells them she'll take them back to her office. The three of them walk into a massive, fancy room filled with expensive furniture and Sephi formally introduces herself as the vice commander of the Royal Knights, mentioning she and Dill have been friends since they were kids. Luna gets super nervous and bows low while introducing herself, and Sephi just laughs and says it's nice to meet her. Dill starts hyping Sephi up, telling Luna that Sephi became vice commander faster than anyone else, and he really looks up to her, which leaves Luna looking totally starstruck by how cool Sephi is. Sephi starts blushing and tells Dill to quit with the compliments, since it won't get him any special treatment. Dill gets a bit more serious and says he isn't just being nice, he really thinks she's on a whole different level than him. Sephi gets quiet and looks pretty serious, which makes Luna wonder what's going on since. Dill asks if it's okay to get straight to the point, and Sephi tells them both to sit down so they can talk. She listens carefully as they explain everything, just nodding along while she processes the details. Sephi leans forward, repeating the part about a mysterious group of kidnappers wearing robes. Dill adds that these guys weren't amateurs. They felt like professional killers who knew exactly what they were doing. Sephi asks if there was anyone else with that group, or if they saw any other members nearby leading Luna to suddenly remember something important that happened back when she was being chased. She thinks back to the mountains where it all started. It was quiet until one of the hooded guys asked if she was really the person the Chancellor called Your Majesty. The guy had a terrifying look in his eyes as he held her, making her realize just how much trouble she was in. Luna remembers the moment she was caught. The guy holding her said she was a perfect match for the description they had, while the other guys planned their escape, saying they needed to move fast since the backup team already had a carriage waiting for them nearby. Back in the office, Sephi thinks over the details about the Chancellor and the extra units. She says it definitely sounds like they're dealing with a massive organization, but the part that really sticks out to her is why those professional killers were calling a random girl Your Majesty. Sephi also notes that they didn't even bother tying Luna up, which shows they were totally sure she had no chance of fighting back or escaping. Luna looks down, feeling completely lost as she asks what all of this is supposed to mean since she's just a normal commoner from a small village. Sephi admits she's just as confused. She knows a lot about what goes on in the capital, but she hasn't heard a single word about any high-profile person going missing. Dill looks at Sephi and gets straight to the point, asking if she can officially take the girl under her protection to keep her safe. Sephi slams her hand on the desk without hesitating, making it clear that she's totally on board with the plan. She tells them the Knights will handle everything from here, and she'll personally make sure a room is set up for Luna inside the headquarters right away. Sephi tells Luna she can crash at the headquarters for the night, and they'll arrange a carriage with a guard to take her home tomorrow, which makes Luna tear up with gratitude while Dill just smiles, feeling relieved that the whole situation is finally under control. Luna bows deeply and apologizes for being such a burden, but Sephi just waves it off, saying it's the least they can do for a crime victim. She also lets them know that the Knights are officially opening up a kidnapping investigation to find out who was really behind the attack. Dill looks over at Luna and tells her she can finally take a breather now that she's safe with the Knights. Luna gives them a huge, bright smile and says she's honestly just so thankful for everything they've done for her. A bit later, Dill stands outside the headquarters and lets out a sigh, thinking about how everything is finally settled. He gives himself a good stretch as the long day finally comes to an end. Even though the sun is starting to go down, he figures he'll head back to the forest for a bit more work, but then Sefe yells his name. Dill turns around to see Sefe sprinting back out of the building looking completely panicked, like something just went wrong. Dill looks back at Sefe and asks her what the big deal is, wondering why she's so worked up all of a sudden since. Sefe gets this really quiet, worried look on her face and tells him she heard a rumor about his situation with his old party, and Dill just gives her a casual smile and comes clean, telling her that she heard right and he actually did get kicked out, but Sefe looks him right in the eyes and tells him not to let it get to him or feel bad about what happened because she starts getting heated, saying that his old party leader is a total idiot who clearly doesn't know how to judge a person's talent, making Dill look at her with a soft expression as he thanks her for having his back, which makes her turn away and blush while the two of them stand there in front of the headquarters for a second, with Sefe trying to work up the courage to say something else. She finally looks up and asks if he'd ever consider just joining the Royal Knights instead of being on his own, but Dill doesn't even look surprised by the offer, and Sefe realizes he probably saw this conversation coming from a mile away and he just starts laughing, telling her he's lost track of how many times she's tried to scout him for the Knights by now. Dill gives Sefe a calm look and tells her he's sorry, but he has to pass on her offer since he really likes the freedom of his current lifestyle and still wants to chase his dream of becoming an S-rank adventurer. Sefe looks a bit let down and realizes she just got rejected by him once again, so Dill starts walking away and waves goodbye, telling her he's going to head out now. But Sefe suddenly remembers something important and shouts out for him to take care of that girl, and then Dill stops and looks back pretty confused, asking her what she means by that, making Sefe get all red in the face as she starts acting really shy and begins to stammer while she tries to play it cool by asking if he only saved the girl and if that's the only thing going on between them. Dill just stands there looking completely baffled by the question and confirms that's exactly what the situation is, and Sefe's whole mood changes instantly as she lets out a sigh of relief and says she totally gets it now. Sefe tells Dill he can leave everything regarding Luna to her and the other knights, so she makes a big promise, saying she'll protect the girl and put her honor as a knight on the line. Dill just gives a casual reply as he keeps walking away, finally heading out on his own, while the scene shifts to a dark room where one of the hooded guys addresses a mysterious person as the Chancellor. The Chancellor doesn't look happy and asks if the three of them really just gave up and came back empty-handed. The hooded guy looks down, sweating as he explains his two partners were way too hurt to keep fighting, and he tells his boss that he had to wait for the guy who crashed their fight to leave before he could move. He says his main focus was just getting his team out of there, admitting he doesn't have any good excuse for the failure. The Chancellor just snaps a finger. The guy barely has time to react before he's suddenly covered in flames and screaming. As the guy burns, the Chancellor coldly mentions that the other two party members have already been dealt with. The Chancellor stares down coldly, telling the last man standing that he's about to join his partners, so the guy starts burning alive while the Chancellor explains that disobeying orders is a crime, but betraying the state is something that only carries the death penalty, leaving three charred bodies smoking on the floor of the dark hall. Another hooded subordinate immediately steps up to kneel, and the Chancellor asks for an update on the Forma cave situation, but the news is intense. The guy reports that the monsters there are multiplying and getting way stronger by the second. The Chancellor listens calmly, then asks what the Emuria government is doing about all this dungeon activity, hoping for a specific answer. The subordinate says they know the dungeons are active, but they still have no idea what's causing it. Hearing that makes the Chancellor let out a dark laugh. Things are actually going better than planned, and they mention that the plan needs to be finished before anyone catches on to the truth, while the subordinate just agrees. The Chancellor looks completely obsessed, talking about how long they've waited for this moment when everything finally wakes up. The subordinate points out that things are moving, but without the Queen, everything stalls out since they won't be able to summon that specific power thereafter, and the hooded guy just quietly agrees. The Chancellor thinks about the intruder for a second, but then decides that finding her is the only thing that matters right now. The order to move out is given immediately, and the subordinate doesn't waste a second before getting to work, while the Chancellor stands before a huge crowd of followers, shouting that their group's longtime goal is finally within reach. The whole room of hooded cultists shouts back in total sync, ready to do whatever it takes. Reaching a hand out, the Chancellor promises everyone that they're definitely going to take back their ancestral home, and the crowd goes wild, cheering at the top of their lungs for the revival of the old Luxel's kingdom. They keep chanting about bringing ancient glory back to the world, making the whole hall shake with their noise. Seeing the fanatical loyalty of the crowd, the Chancellor just stands there with a really creepy smile. The Chancellor is looking pretty intense, telling his followers that their goal of going back home is finally right in front of them, and outside the cult's hideout, the full moon is hanging high over the forest trees. Back in the woods, Dill finds a solid-looking fallen tree and pats it, deciding it's the perfect spot to set up camp for the night. He figures since he's got a place to sleep, he might as well go out and hunt some monsters until he actually feels tired, so he starts walking down a quiet path, but stops when he hears something weird coming from the shadows. He looks toward the noise, thinking it's strange because this part of the woods is usually only full of really weak monsters. Dill reminds himself that there's always an exception to the rule and carefully peeks through some thick bushes to get a better look. The second he sees what's happening, his face goes totally pale, and he can barely find the words to say what's out there. It turns out Albert and the rest of Brilliant Road are standing their ground against a massive, glowing monster, and Dill loses it when he realizes it's a silver wolf, since that's a top-tier boss that should be way off in a cave somewhere. Albert is in bad shape, leaning on his sword with his armor literally falling apart, while the monster just grins at him, ready to finish the job. Watching from the bushes, Dill wonders if the beast crawled out of a cave, but either way, he knows things couldn't get any worse since it's a full moon tonight. Normally, this thing is just a D-rank monster when it stays underground, but once that moonlight hits it, its power jumps way up to a high C rank, making it a total nightmare for the party. Dill is shocked to see Albert out here, especially seeing the guy so exhausted he can barely even stand up anymore, so Albert pulls it together just enough to yell for a fireball. The witch nods, telling him she's got it, and she puts everything she has into her staff, screaming out the spell as she lets a massive blast of fire fly. The silver wolf just stands there as the flames come crashing down from above, and then the whole forest lights up from a massive explosion that completely covers the monster in smoke and debris. Albert stares into the mess, asking if they finally took it down, while the rest of the party just waits and hopes it's actually dead. The smoke clears and the silver wolf stands there perfectly fine, letting out a growl that shakes the woods. The witch is totally panicking, saying that was her 5th shot and she can't believe the thing doesn't have a single scratch on it. The spearman decides he's seen enough and jumps into the air, yelling that it's his turn while Albert screams for him to wait. He doesn't listen though, putting everything into a massive strike right against the monster's chest. But as soon as the spear hits, the guy just freezes up in total shock. Albert stands back with the rest of the party, staring at the beast and wondering what kind of insane power they're even up against. The spearman starts crying right there, looking at his broken weapon and sobbing about his spear being ruined since the wolf's skin was so tough the metal just snapped off. And now the monster is drooling, ready to eat him. Dill is watching the whole mess from the bushes, thinking it's crazy that a B-rank party is struggling this much against a C-rank enemy. The knight looks over at Albert, seeing him covered in sweat, and realizing their leader is basically at his limit. The knight is totally wiped out, looking over at Albert and telling him they've got to get out of here before things get worse. But Albert isn't having any of it, spinning around and yelling at the guy for even suggesting they run away. He's obsessed with their new gear, telling the rest of the party they can't leave because he hasn't even finished testing it out yet. The dude has this creepy smile on his face, thinking to himself that a weak monster like this shouldn't be giving them any trouble. The witch finally loses her cool and screams at him to stop acting tough, since it's obvious the whole team is at their breaking point. Albert just gets even angrier, shouting that there's no way a group that killed a red dragon could ever lose to a wolf. The spearman is right there crying, pointing out that regardless of their past, they are definitely losing the fight right now. The priestess joins in too, telling Albert straight up that for some reason the whole party has gotten way weaker than they used to be. Albert grits his teeth in total denial, repeating her words back like he can't believe it before telling her to shut her mouth. He charges back into the fight with a look of pure desperation, yelling that if they just work together, or rather, if he just does it himself. Albert is losing it, screaming that there is no way he can lose to a monster like this. Dill is watching the whole mess from the bushes, sweating and wondering if he should actually step in. He starts thinking back to when the witch laughed in his face, telling him he's useless and never to show up again, so he grips his cloak and reminds himself that those people aren't his friends anymore. But then he looks at his hand, thinking maybe he can still pull off that enhanced spell he used once before. Everything stops when someone yells Albert's name, and the rest of the party just stands there frozen. The wolf has Albert pinned to the ground and is ready to finish him. But then Dill just walks right out of the trees. The priestess and the witch are both losing their minds, yelling out Dill's name like they can't believe it's him. Albert is still a jerk even while pinned down, asking Dill why he's here before demanding a buff right now. The dude starts laughing like a maniac, telling Dill his magic is trash while Dill just stares at how selfish he is. Dill looks Albert straight in the face and tells him no way, he's not doing anything for him. The witch starts losing it, yelling that he's just a support mage and asking why he even showed up. Dill doesn't care what she thinks. He shouts back that he's here to fight for himself this time. He charges right toward the monster and calls out his enhanced spell, his body starting to glow as the wolf takes a massive swing at Albert. The force of the claw alone almost blows him away. The witch and the knight are both screaming Albert's name, thinking it's over for their leader. Albert is shaking on the ground. He's completely terrified and begs the monster to stay back while Dill steps in and lands a heavy punch right into the wolf's stomach, the impact shaking the whole area. Albert can't even move. He just watches as the massive wolf gets sent flying back through the dirt. Dill stays low and realizes he actually pulled the spell off again, while the girls just stare at him like he's a total stranger. Albert is stuck on the ground, looking up in total shock at the guy standing over him, and Dill doesn't give him a second look, telling Albert he's taking over and to just stay back while Albert tries to yell back about who Dill thinks he's talking to, but Dill is already moving. The giant wolf snaps and lunges forward with its claws out, ready to tear through anything in its way, but Dill is way too fast and slides right under the beast's massive reach. Then he comes up swinging and throws a punch with so much power it sends out a shockwave, landing a direct hit on the wolf's head that's so hard it looks like the monster's eye might pop right out. Dill just fixes his hair and casually mentions that he definitely won that fight, leaving the girls in the back totally stunned. The witch can't believe her eyes and asks how he's doing damage when they couldn't even scratch it, wondering if his buff spell was always this crazy. The priestess watches Dill in total disbelief, wondering if the spell he used was actually just a basic enhanced buff because it doesn't make any sense to the witch either. She points out that Dill is a backline support mage, so there's no way he should be able to do that. The priestess adds that even with the best buffs, a support guy shouldn't have the power of a vanguard, especially since she's never heard of a spell that actually changes someone's physical appearance like that. She's completely stumped, and the witch is just as lost, asking the rest of the group what kind of crazy stuff Dill must have done to himself to get that strong. Dill doesn't seem bothered at all, just smirking and asking Albert what the next part of their little challenge is supposed to be. But the giant wolf isn't finished yet. It stands its ground, huffing out hot steam as it glares at them, and then the monster slams its claws back into the dirt to steady itself, clearly getting ready for a second round. Dill notices the change in the beast's vibe and lets out a quick sound as he watches it closely right before. The wolf lets out a massive roar that's so loud the girls have to cover their ears while Albert just stares from the ground. Dill recognizes the new pack as Garms, and the spearman realizes the silver werewolf just called for backup. The knight says they don't have a choice but to fight, and the spearman agrees even if it's a huge pain since he's ready to scrap with his bare hands, while the priestess knows they just have to do what it takes to live. The priestess calls out to Albert, who's still stuck on the ground watching everything go down, and Albert is just losing it, staring at the fight and wondering how Dill is actually holding his own against the werewolf. He's totally shaken because Dill is pulling off a win that he couldn't even manage himself, and the priestess can see how much he's struggling, looking over at him with a pretty worried look on her face. Dill isn't stressed at all, smirking at the wolves and asking if they're trying to use numbers to win now. But the big wolf stands right under the full moon and lets out a roar that shakes the whole forest. Dill sees the beast's energy changing and asks if the thing is seriously using the moonlight to heal itself. Dill stares down the werewolf. He was hoping to save some of his strength for leveling up later, but things are getting messy, so he decides he has to finish this fast before it gets worse. He braces himself, waiting for the charge, but the wolf suddenly bolts into the woods. He yells for it to wait, wondering if the thing is actually running away or just setting a trap. He loses it in the trees and realizes he messed up by following it into the brush. It's pitch black out here, making it impossible to tell where a sneak attack might come from. Suddenly, the beast drops from the canopy right on top of him. He barely reacts in time and skids across the dirt. He catches his breath, knowing he only survived that by a hair. The wolf is gone again, and the visibility in these woods is total garbage. He knows he'd have the upper hand if it were day, but since he can't see a thing, he stops moving. He tells himself to quit relying on his eyes and focus on something else. He stands still with eyes shut, sensing the beast in the dark. Dill stands perfectly still in the dark, telling himself to sharpen his senses to find the target. His eyes snap open and he yells that he's found it right there. He taps into his enhanced power and shouts that it's over, lunging forward with a massive punch that hits the werewolf square in the face, but he's already moving on. He looks back at the monster and calmly says the win is his. Over in the clearing, the witch finishes off her own fight with a fireball and stands there with the knight, catching her breath and asking if it's finally over. Suddenly, the whole party stops dead. They look completely shocked at what's stepping out of the woods. Dill walks into the light, dragging the dead werewolf, and the knight just stares, barely able to ask if Dill really took that thing down. The spearman drops the last wolf with a loud shout, but then he stops, looking around totally confused. He looks back at the rest of Brilliant Road while holding his map, asking if the boss fight ended, without him even knowing. The priestess stands nearby, biting her finger and wondering how Dill is suddenly so strong. Albert walks over and looks down at his struggling teammate, reaching out a hand to help him up. The spearman is absolutely fuming, shaking with rage while he looks at Albert's offer. He doesn't take it. Instead, he just slaps Albert's hand away as hard as he can. He starts yelling that the party could won by themselves and he only struggled because he's having an off day. Albert doesn't even argue. He just looks at the guy and says he gets it. The spearman loses his mind at how calm Albert is, but then someone yells Albert's name. The witch and knight rush over, asking if everyone is okay and if anyone got hurt. The knight stares at Dill with a look of total disbelief, finally asking what happened and why he looks so different. Dill just stands there looking confused, asking what's wrong with the way he looks. The witch completely loses it at his lack of awareness and snaps her mirror open so he can see for himself. Dill looks at his reflection and freezes, realizing his face and entire vibe have changed. Just then, a loud voice cuts through the silence, telling everyone, it's time to go. The priestess tries to bring up the materials they need, but the spearman yells that he's having an off day and wants to leave right now. As the group starts moving, one of the other guys rushes up to Dill. He grabs Dill's hands and shakes them like crazy, thanking him for saving his life. Dill watches them walk away, looking at his hand and realizing he can finally use his magic again, even if it did end up changing the way he looks. Dill stands alone among the trees, wondering what's actually going on with his enhanced skill, so he decides it's time to check his stats. He pulls up his system window, realizing his level has changed. The screen shows Dill is now a level 35 support mage with a few new tricks. He sees his level jumped up by 2 points, which is a pretty big deal, but then the hologram starts to flicker and glow as if it's updating with something else entirely, making Dill freeze in total shock. He can't believe what he's seeing on the display as the system tells him he just learned 2 brand new spells called Enchant and Engage Link. He reaches out to touch the screen, reading the word enchant out loud and wondering about the second one. He asks himself what an Engage Link is even supposed to be, since the name sounds like some kind of jewelry, but he figures it's just a really weird skill. Dill stares at his status window, thinking about the enchant skill. It's something every support mage knows about, since it lets them add elemental properties to a teammate's gear. It's basically the best way to power up a fighter, but Dill realizes it's useless for non-elemental types. Since he's on his own, he won't be using it on himself anytime soon. Looking at the monsters he just took down, he knows the skill won't help until he finds a new party. Moving on, he gets stuck on that second skill, Engage Link. He's been a mage for a while, but he's never heard of anything like it before. He reaches out and taps the screen to see the details, and the description is even weirder. He reads it out loud, wondering how he's supposed to turn bonds into power. The whole concept just doesn't make any sense to him. He stares at the glowing text, trying to figure out what that actually means. He starts wondering if other support mages have this, or how they'd even use it, but he just sighs at the moon. He realizes he's totally alone out here, so there's nobody left for him to ask. Dill looks up at the moon, realizing that since he's not with Albert's group anymore, he doesn't know a soul in the capital besides Sephi. He walks down the path, thinking it might be a good idea to ask Sephi to introduce him to some of her contacts later. By the time morning hits the city, he's totally wiped out. He lets out a big yawn, thinking about how he stayed up way too late training. Walking through the morning streets, he thinks about how those monsters were just total trash. He didn't even make more money than a basic silver wolf hunt. He looks down, feeling pretty discouraged. It feels like he spent all that time just to learn some weird magic that he can't even use on his own. But just as he's sulking, a massive crashing sound rings out nearby. He stops dead in his tracks, completely caught off guard by the noise. He rounds the corner and sees a wall totally smashed in. There's smoke everywhere, and a group of hooded guys are standing over some fallen guards. Right in the middle of the mess is Sephi Sapphire. She's gripping her sword and breathing hard, looking like she's already been through it. She stares down the attackers, unable to believe they'd actually be bold enough to pull a direct stunt like this in the city. The hooded men stand their ground, and one of them is actually carrying a knocked-out Luna. Sephi glares at them, telling the group they've got some serious nerves showing up there. The lead attacker looks down at Sefe and says they didn't really want to use such pushy methods to get what they want. But they got lucky because the captain and the main knights are out of the capital right now, leaving the city's defense pretty thin. Sefe grits her teeth, breaking a sweat as she realizes these guys are actually way more skilled than she thought. So, the leader decides it's time to go and tells his guys he's leaving the rest to them while he takes Luna away. Sefe yells for them to wait and tries to give chase, but one of the hooded guys steps right in her way to stop her. Two of them draw their swords, blocking the path and telling her there's no way they're letting her pass. Sefe gets into a fighting stance and says if that's how it is, she'll just have to force her way through them, but the guy just smiles and asks if she's really okay with that, since going all out in the middle of the street will just get the townspeople hurt. He looks over at the busy city street and corrects himself, saying they'll actually go out of their way to involve the citizen, leaving Sefe completely frozen in shock as she realizes these monsters are planning to use the innocent people as hostages. The hooded guy casts a spell called Bind while swinging his arm, and the magic light wraps around Sefe as she tries to move. Sefe gets completely tangled up in magic ropes, leaving her totally stuck and unable to fight back. Dill comes running around the corner and yells out Sefe's name, but then Sefe apologizes to Dill as soon as she sees him, telling him the bad news that Lana has been taken. Dill can't believe what he's hearing and stares at the two guys who are just standing there waiting for him with their swords out. Dill doesn't waste any time and gets ready to jump into the fight, calling out his enhanced magic to boost himself up. Dill stands there looking like a completely different person with all that power flowing through him, making one hooded guy wonder if this is the intruder from the reports, while the other realizes they might not even be able to run away. Dill looks down the street toward the enemies, while Sefe watches him from the ground, still unable to move, and Sefe stares up at him, completely stunned by the way he looks right now and wondering what the deal is with this crazy new look. The hooded guys start yelling about bringing some old-school glory back to the world, and then they trigger a spell called Garrot that makes magic circles tighten around their necks. Dill sees what's happening and loses it, screaming Sefe's name as he lunges forward to grab her, and the whole place just blows up. Dill dives on top of Sefe to shield her from the blast, while the enemies are left face down in the dirt, completely destroyed. Looking at the mess, Dill asks why they'd choose a suicide move like that, then checks on Sefe to see if she's hurt, but she's mostly just in shock. Sefe mentions it was probably some twisted sense of pride they had. Dill just stands there looking confused, not really understanding why anyone would throw their life away. Moving on, things settle down at the royal castle where the tall towers stand quiet against the sky. But inside, Sefe slams her fist against the wall and yells about how she promised she'd keep that girl safe. Dill tries to step in, but Sefe is spiraling, blaming herself and saying she should have doubled the guards or done something more. She keeps going, saying it was a huge mistake and she should have just brought the girl to her own house where she could watch her personally. Dill finally puts a hand on her shoulder and tells her she needs to calm down before she loses it completely. Dill reaches out and pats Sefe on the head, telling her not to put all the blame on herself. He says he's just as much at fault for not explaining how dangerous those cultists really were. He looks her in the eye and tells her she did a great job, then asks if she'll help him figure out their next move so they can fix this together. Sefe blushes a bit and quietly thanks him for the support, but things get serious again when Dill asks if she has any idea where they took Luna. She admits she has no clue and asks if he's got anything. Dill sits there thinking for a second and says he might actually have a lead. Suddenly, something clicks in his head and he looks up like he just remembered a major detail. He thinks back to when the girl mentioned the enemies were planning on heading over to the Forma caves. Dill says the name of the caves out loud, and Sefe realizes she knows exactly which spot he's talking about. She points out that it's just a beginner-level dungeon where Luna was supposed to go in the first place, and it's actually close enough to reach quickly by horse. The two of them start racing toward the location, and Sefe tells him he doesn't really have to go this far for her. But Dill just looks at her and asks if he really seems like the kind of guy who'd just walk away and leave her to handle the rest alone. Sefe gives him a huge, bright smile and says she doesn't think he's that kind of guy at all, so Dill just looks away while they're riding and tells her she shouldn't have asked if she already knew the answer. As they pick up speed, Sefe explains that the main knight squad will be coming as backup later, but since it takes time to get a full unit ready, she says they're going to charge in ahead of everyone else. Dill agrees and they push their horses even harder, racing straight for the dungeon until they finally reach the entrance of the cave, which is completely covered in layers of thick barbed wire. Dill mentions that the area is supposed to be restricted right now because the monsters inside have been getting aggressive. Sefe nods and adds that anyone caught going in without permission usually gets hit with a massive penalty. She looks at the untouched entrance and points out that it doesn't even look like anyone has actually gone inside, but Dill stops her right there and tells her to wait a minute because something feels off. Sephi reaches out and her hand passes right through the metal. Dill is totally shocked by the wire, but Sephi just tells him the whole thing is a fake illusion meant to keep people away. She starts looking around the area to see if there are any other hidden tricks waiting for them. Sephi checks out the area and realizes they're looking at a pretty rare magic tool made from a special stone, and she explains that the group used it to create a fake version of the guild's barbed wire. Dill can't believe a tool like that actually exists. Sephi doesn't waste any time and destroys the tool with one solid kick, sending shards flying everywhere as the illusion of the barbed wire completely fades away, revealing that the path was never actually blocked off. Dill realizes the entrance was wide open the whole time, so Sephi tells him it's time to move in, and they head inside the cave. The two of them start walking down a long, quiet stone hallway, lit by rows of magic lamps on the walls. As they walk, Sephi says she'll fill him in on who those attackers really are. Dill is surprised she actually managed to identify them. She says there's no doubt about it after seeing that crest earlier, and identifies the group as Nostalgia. Dill admits he's never even heard of a group with that name before, so Sephi tells him it's been a while for her too since they haven't caused any big trouble lately. Dill just wants to know what they're really about. Sephi gets serious and explains that this group is actually working to rebuild a country that disappeared, and Dill can't believe what he's hearing, so she asks if he's ever heard of the Luxel Kingdom from the old legend, a place Dill remembers from fairy tales. He mentions it was that ancient civilization that got famous for its summoning magic, but it didn't end well. They lost control of that power, and the whole kingdom got wiped out in just one night. As they keep walking, Sephi tells him their big catchphrase is about bringing ancient glory back to the modern world, and Dill finally puts it all together. They're trying to revive Luxel right here, which explains why they're so dangerous. The cultists are obsessed, constantly yelling about restoring that old glory to the world today, making Dill wonder if these guys are actually descendants of the original kingdom. Sephi says their leader goes by the title of Chancellor, though the royal knights think the whole thing is just a crazy fantasy. But the scary part is that the group honestly believes every bit of it is real. Dill is completely blindsided by the news and asks if these people are just crazy since Sephi explains that's why the knights treat them like a cult. They don't worship a god, they worship a dead nation. Sephi says it makes sense people would be obsessed since Luxel was so legendary back in the day, but she mentions there are even researchers who spend their whole lives studying it. Dill thinks it over and has a scary realization, asking if the reason they called Luna Your Majesty was because they think she's their queen. Sephi says they probably just decided that on their own and calls the whole situation a huge pain, but Dill says he has a really bad feeling about where this is going, so Sephi tells him they need to move fast. They keep pushing forward until they find a massive stone entrance carved right into the wall of the dungeon. The room inside is crawling with goblins just waiting for a fight. Sephi looks out at the crowd of monsters and says she's never seen a pack of goblins this big, so Dill stares at the group and wonders if this is what monster activation looks like. Sephi says they have to go through this spot to move forward, and Dill agrees that they're out of time and have to force their way through. Sephi draws her sword and tells Dill she needs his full support if they're going to survive this. Dill clenches his fist and says he's actually going to fight on the front lines too, which catches Sephi off guard since he's a support mage. She looks at him for a second before smiling and saying she understands. Sephi yells for them to move out and Dill shouts back, totally ready for the fight, as the two of them charge straight into the pack of goblins. In a total shift, Sephi is relaxing in a bath and tells Luna she can use the barracks bath whenever she wants while she's staying with them. Luna looks really happy about the offer and thanks Sephi for being so nice. Luna tells Sephi she's cool with just being called by her name. She's used to it from her time at the orphanage. Sephi gives her a soft smile and agrees to call her Luna, but then she points out that Luna is still being formal with her. Luna just laughs and says she was taught to respect her elders, showing Sephi that she was raised with a lot of care. Sephi looks her right in the eyes and promises they'll get her back home no matter what, telling the girl she can finally stop worrying and just relax. Luna stands there completely stunned. She's totally blown away by Sephi's kindness. Sephi asks if the bath is getting to her head, making Luna snap out of it and swear she's okay.